Stephanie's going to talk a little bit more about how some of the conversations that you had at your tables are a part of a broader conversation that Upstream is helping to cultivate across Minnesota with community and in greater Minnesota. So I'll let you guys take it away. And thank you so much for your conversations.
Thank you very much. And I'm so glad you finished on that point, because the conversations you just had are part of what we wanted you to do, to get to know each other. They're part of Minnesotans talking to each other, but they're also very much an example of the community organizing and listening sessions that are going around Minnesota right now as part of the Upstream project. Upstream was brought to us, boy, I think about 8 months ago. And the idea was, we're in a very complicated political time. We're in a time where the notion of climate is controversial in some places, where these issues of what we do with agriculture and water are hot button issues. How do we create a common language, a common understanding, and common purpose while still moving in meaningful directions? So when that body of work that was already beginning was brought to the Minneapolis Foundation, we said we'd like to help with that. We especially wanted to help with something that we felt was a real issue, which was to bring this conversation, similar to what you had, much more directly into more of communities of color and engaging a much broader audience. So we made an investment from the foundation in all of that. But Stephanie, I wonder if you could talk a bit about how this kind of conversation you had is going on around Minnesota and how that's going to add up to something.
Sure. Thanks, R.T., for having us here today. And I'm so glad that we were able to kick off in a really inspiring way, just to be able to, get to know each other and talk about what really connects us individually to this special place is, Minnesota. Like we grumble about the weather and we complain about winter. We certainly have our issues with, making sure that this is a Minnesota that's welcoming to everyone and that everyone benefits from, being in this great state. But we do have a lot of, pride and love for where we're at. And so I just want to go a little bit more into the listening sessions that you referred to. So earlier this year, actually, I think it took place directly during when we were going through the polar vortex. So I think that was perhaps kind of influencing some of the responses that we had. But the Minneapolis Foundation and the McKnight Foundation were some early supporters of this work to really help us go into communities that have not been typically a major part of the dominant environmental movement, both in Minnesota and nationally. And we wanted to have conversations that were really, get to the core of where we think, people might not necessarily identify or represent themselves as an environmentalist, but they have care for nature, for creation, for the outdoors, however they think about it and the words that they use in their mind. And so we wanted to draw out what those conversations were, working with partners that we already had relationships with. Upstream partnered with Conservation Minnesota and Grassroots Solutions to help work to invite organizations that they weren't environmental organizations, just community organizations in various communities of color and indigenous communities throughout Minnesota. Invite individuals and organizations to participate and co-facilitate these conversations. And we asked everyone the same 5 questions during these listening sessions, including the two that you considered today, and just had really engaging and very interesting and eye-opening conversations about these things. As I mentioned, this occurred during the winter, so people are talking a lot about like the awe of the power of nature and how winter is something that threads us together as Minnesotans. But other conversations came out, and a couple of the themes that I thought were some of the strongest themes that came out when we're talking with some of the more recent immigrant and refugee communities. Many of them said there is no word for environment in our native language. It does not translate. We talk about nature or Mother Earth, or there might be multiple words in which we talk about what the dominant culture typically refers to as the environment. But that was just such an eye-opening moment for our group when we're saying, look, like we're not including people because we're literally not using the right words that are not inclusive of all of the cultures and all of the groups that live in Minnesota. So that was one really critical moment in that conversation. Another really important theme that came out from that was that a lot of the groups that we had conversation with look at the environment and look at human beings as existing within the environment, not like humans are sitting on top and manage the environment or must they extract things from it for the economy. It was, we exist within it, we are a part of it. There's a natural balance that we need to make sure that we maintain, and if we take care of the environment, it'll take care of us. And so those were a couple of the main themes that I thought were really eye-opening, and we have plans to continue having those conversations to on a broader level to see what else we can draw out from conversations with Minnesotans.
One of the things that seems to be quite complicated about this is that there are really two trains running at the same time. One, the incredibly important necessity of getting more people on board and finding common ground. And as anybody who's done any community organizing knows, that takes time. Meanwhile, time is one issue on climate that we seem to be pretty much running out of. And when we look at what's supposed to happen in the next 10 years, and we look at the idea of immediate action, we look at how long it's taken people and a whole lot of talk and no action. How do you balance the necessity to get a common dialogue with the immediacy of the issue?
That's a really tricky balance that we are trying to strike. With Upstream, when we're thinking about it in like what we like to call the Upstream way, we think about that these are conversations that should have taken place decades ago. And so the most immediate time, the urgency that we feel in trying to have these conversations and encourage as many communities across Minnesota to have these conversations is starting right now. And so that's what we've started with this model of the listening sessions, and we're working to build that out. And I think we want to have faith in Minnesotans, and that when they start talking about this in terms that are like personal and that they can identify with, and maybe aren't necessarily connected to a specific policy action or a specific legislative initiative they want to see, but they start to see themselves a little bit more in, hey, there's good work that's going on in Minnesota. How can I be a part of it? And so I think we can help provide the on-ramps through having these conversations that are accessible to more Minnesotans than we've had, previously, to provide them opportunity to if they see themselves connected to wanting to do some of the work with some of the great partner organizations that we've already started with, for example, with Fresh Energy or Conservation Minnesota or MCA or Sierra Club, 4 groups that are doing incredible work in this state. And so through having these conversations within the various communities, we can help provide those connections that people can get involved if they choose. Or maybe, maybe action looks different for someone. Maybe it's something more that they can do, within their community or within their household to do individual change. And so that's what we're hoping to do, to be able to have more accessible, broad conversations with Minnesotans.
Great. So a final short question. 5 years from now, people look back on Upstream. What are they going to say Upstream accomplished?
Our goal with this is really to foster an ethic of caring for the environment in Minnesota. As I was listening to the responses that you all gave during the group exercise that we just had and our previous panel, I really wanted to shout out a lot of the shout outs that they gave to other organizations, but just the way that they kind of talked about whether it's tying back to, and protecting and helping to foster our previous traditions that have gotten perhaps lost or buried in some of the, modern day times and traditions, or being able to, I think Ben, the cross-country skier, I was just struck by how he immediately was talking about how this is a special place, and what we do right now to help make sure it remains special for generations to come is so critical and important. And so that's what we're really trying to do, is how can we lift the level of dialogue and move past the partisan divides and some of the rhetoric that we often encounter when it comes to getting into policy debates on the environment. I've had a lot of experience with that in prior roles in my career on being on the forefront of that. And what we really are trying to do is help fill in the gaps for a lot of the work that great organizations are doing right now, great businesses that are setting sustainability goals, and draw all that together so Minnesotans can see, hey, we're moving things forward in a positive way. we can protect and help make sure that we have a Minnesota that we all love and that we depend on and we identify with for generations to come. And so building that common thread, that common shared commitment and values and ethic to our state and the environment that we have here and the natural things that we love about it is what we want to do.
Good. Please thank Stephanie, and please pay attention to the Upstream project. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mayor.